Jim Vanderwall at the Fraser Basin Council. Thanks everyone for joining us for our webinar today on renewing First Nations housing. We're talking about saving money and energy. This is part of a series that we're doing as part of looking at green building policy and development with First Nations communities around BC. Both supporting individual communities with one-on-one mentorship as well as some group learning events like this one. And just want to acknowledge the financial support from the Real Estate Foundation of BC and Ministry of Energy and Mines, as well as others. We're fortunate today to have two great presenters to talk about Kwadacha First Nation's experience in saving about $2,000 per year per household with a project that they've been involved in. Our first speaker is Dawn Bursey, who's the Executive Director of Kwadacha First Nation. And after Dawn, we're going to hear from Arif Abraham, who's the President and CEO of Quality Program Services, the consultant on the project. And after that, we'll be able to take some questions. So like I mentioned earlier, think about your questions. We'll be using the question box, so you can type your questions in as you think of them or at the end. And we'll hopefully have a good discussion at the end. So I'm going to just give me a moment here, and I'm going to switch over to Dawn, and Dawn will give us an overview of where Kwadacha Nation is and a little bit about the community.
Good morning, everyone. It's Dawn here. I'm just going to introduce, tell you a little bit about Kwadacha. Kwadacha is actually located in Fort Ware. It's about 250 miles north of Mackenzie. Mackenzie has a population of about 4,500. This is accessible by logging road. We also have an airstrip in the community that you can fly into as well. This is one of the most remote, isolated communities in British Columbia, and Kwadacha is one of 5 nations that make up the Casca Dene territory, which encompasses about 92,000 square miles in northern British Columbia. There's a brief history there. Sekani people gradually moved west into BC from the Rocky Mountains beginning about 12,000 years ago. Migratory people, they had really no permanent settlements, lived mostly in small mobile family groups, followed constantly moving animals, had a cooperative but less formal social structure, and minimal material goods due to frequent travel by foot. 1793, for about 100 years, they started trading with the Hudson Bay Company. 1930s, first generation of children were sent to Lee Jack Residential School, over 600 kilometers southwest of Fort Ware. There are many social, political, and economic changes that most Canadian First Nations experienced, Kwadacha experienced as well, and these were compressed into roughly 100 years. The ultimate change occurred in the mid-1960s when the Sekani lands and waterways were flooded by the Wilson Reservoir caused by the WAC Bennett Dam built across the Peace River. This is still having an impact today. There's just some photos from the community. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful remote spot. That picture in the bottom middle is our chief, Donnie Van Summer. There's about 400 people living in Fort Ware, of which 380 are Kwadacha Nation members. There's also 145 off-reserve members, many of whom would love to be in the community, but sadly there is a shortage of housing. Employment in Fort Ware includes opportunities at the Bannon Health Administration Center, the school, public works, and the forestry, mining, and oil and gas sectors. 10 to 12% of community members rely on income assistance and see an average of about $540 monthly. There's many community buildings. There's more than that now. And the school has about 92 students. I think they're up closer to 100 now. They all are taught their traditional language of Sekani, and the band is actually governed by an elected chief and council. And now we're going to get a reef on, but before I do, I'll just tell you a little bit about how we got where we are. About 5 or 6 years ago, the current chief and council, which is the same chief and council as today, more or less, started on a number of green initiatives, decided they were going to be a green community, one of which was to reduce, if not eliminate, their reliance on diesel-generated power. So about 4 years ago, they partnered with BC Hydro in a project called Remote Community Electrification, after which point they became BC Hydro customers. So as we went through this process and the community members started getting billed by getting their BC Hydro bills, it was evident that there were some major issues with either consumption or poor quality or rundown housing that was causing these bills to be very, very high. You know, a few other initiatives they've got on the go. They've moved away from a landfill and just completed a transfer station. They have a successful recycling program and a reuse it center, and a number of community greenhouses, and we're currently undergoing a community beautification project. So there's lots going on there, and now we'll. So the bills were a big problem, and were identified as you know, something that we needed to really look closely at, which led us to having a look at energy efficiency on a broad scale across the community. Take it away, Arif.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Dawn. I'm just going to give me a moment here. While we're just switching here, I'm going to just do a quick little poll here to engage you a little bit and find out who's on the call. So here's a question about who you're with. So if you don't mind letting us know. Great. Well, thanks very much. And here's the results. So it's a great mix of folks, both from communities, government, utilities, and other support organizations, both business and nonprofit. Okay, so I'm just going to switch things over here for Arif, and take it away, Arif.
Well, thank you, Jim, and thank you, Dawn, for that introduction, and Dawn for the introducing the community there. I think I know many of you who are on the webinar today, so hello from Vancouver. So I think before we get going, I think it's important and to talk about the successes that we together have achieved in Kwadacha. It's useful to maybe talk about the team, what really made it happen. And I think the key two teams are really the funding team, which is BC Hydro, ANSI, Ministry of Energy, and actually Van City as well, with a small but important contribution to what we achieved. And then there was the group of worker bees. There was, of course, the band, the chief and council in Kwadacha, but there was also the staff. I mean, Don Bursey is on there, Kelsey, who's the housing coordinator. There's Tracy Charlie, who's our energy champion there. So I think they are an integral part of that. Fraser Basin Council and Jim in particular, we were all part of the team to make that happen. I think a special thanks to Robin Spencer, who I don't think is on the call. She's with the Aboriginal Relations staff at BC Hydro. I think Robin was instrumental and an important part of the success of this particular initiative. And of course, there was us and our staff at Quality Program Services. So just as Dawn said, people started getting on to BC Hydro bills. And here's the picture in terms of the average residential consumption. Sure, it was $2,700, which is still a lot of money. If, as Dawn said, if you are receiving $540 a month. So we had some serious issues around social justice. Actually, people's ability to pay, because if you haven't got the money, you can't pay. And we had 25% of the homes were just under $5,000 a year. Mind you, these are at 2013 BC Hydro rates, and so we're talking about adding at least another 12% onto these numbers. So there was some serious hardship likely to happen for people. Among the top 10, we were into the $6,000 to $7,000 a year. And these were Zone 2 rates from BC Hydro. So we really had a challenge that we had to address, and cosmetics just wouldn't do. And so why? I mean, Don touched on that. Why was consumption high? So I think it's a combination of the historical demand in First Nations with growing populations, not enough homes, and inadequate funding. And so you've got so many dollars to build so many houses. You don't necessarily have fantastic contractors around. So we ended up really with a mixture of houses that were relatively poorly constructed. Certainly energy efficiency wasn't high up there in any contractor's minds, I don't think. So that's the sort of fundamental issue. And then there's the lack of funding and capacity in terms of maintaining homes in communities. And again, that needs money and capacity. So that's a second issue. And the third one, as Don said, is the lifestyle and in-home behaviors and the impact on energy bill. I don't think that's anything specific to First Nations. My experience of 20 or 30 years of working in this industry, that's just across the board. But what the first two things really combine together to make a perfect storm where we start having incredibly high energy bills because of the three things interacting. The result, and it's been impossible or hasn't been possible for me to find statistics, but we've worked in over 50 to nearly 60 communities now, and I do know that what I've seen is energy bills on reserve can be 2 to 3 times as high as the average in BC. So we have a specific and separate issue, I think, happening in terms of energy efficiency in First Nations communities. QPS has a particular approach, which is, listen and observe. Rather than just going and doing things, just listen and observe and see what's happening. When we start looking at homes, we're looking at a lot more than energy because they're all interrelated. In a silly example, you got a leaky roof. There's no point putting insulation in because you're wasting your money and the insulation is not going to do its function. And work at the community's pace. We all work at different paces, but it's important that we work at a community's pace. And sometimes it's faster than we want to go, and sometimes it's slower. But the reality is, in order to be successful, we have to work at the community's pace. And the last one, which I think you're all aware of, is to build trust. Because who are we? We jump out from Vancouver, we arrive in the community, so it's taken time. And I think, gosh, it's a long time, Dawn. Now we started working back in 2013. Yeah, it's so we've been there. We become familiar faces in the community, and that's important. And they know they can call on us, and we can work together. The other one is an important part, I think, of energy efficiency is to diagnose before prescribing. I think a lot of programs focus on prescriptions, and we wouldn't dream of doing that in our physical health conditions, but we seem to do it quite readily, and that works for certain populations. But for the reasons we just talked about, I just don't think that works in many First Nations communities. So I think the diagnosing is a really important part before we say here's the solution. And the other thing is, it's not just the technological fixes, right? A lot of energy efficiency efforts seem to go just on the technology. We do this to the home, then we walk away and everything is going to be okay. Well, it doesn't happen like that in reality. So we have the technology, which is really important, but then there's also the organizational aspect, the housing managers, the operations staff, the financial people like Dawn. They're all an important and integral part of making this thing work in the long term. And then there's the behavior aspects with residents. I mean, historically in First Nations communities and in other homes as well, technicians come in and they do things and they disappear. Residents really don't know what's happened, and so they have to be part of the feedback loop. And Tracy, our energy champion in the community, was a key part of making sure that when we made changes in communities, people were aware of what we were doing, why we were doing it, and their role in that change. Develop a business case. I think that was critical to this initiative, because at the end of the day, we're asking for somebody to put their hands in their pocket and hand out money. We really have to make the case, and so energy efficiency in kilowatt hours is important, but dollars are the things that get spent. So we spent a long time making a robust business case for Kwadacha, tried to actually work synergistically, which is why we have BC Hydro, ANSI, MEM, and Van City to a certain extent. But I think it's important that we do need to leverage the dollars coming in for different reasons into the community, because one organization on its own, well, it'd be great if they could fund the whole approach, but I think we have to leverage each other's strengths and work together. In Kwadacha, we started off back in, actually, Don, I think it was before we met. 2010 is when we first started on this thing. But anyway, we started off with a diagnosis of all of the homes, and we went around about 80 homes. And what was important is that we actually had to do something in the homes, because First Nations communities, I think, get surveyed to death, and we wanted to do something while we were in the home. So we did some basic upgrades, provided some basic energy efficiency education in order to allow us to select some pilot homes. Community engagement and education really started from day one, and that's the next couple of slides. We had community dinners, we had the community champion, we were constantly in the community, making the community aware and make the energy efficiency part top of mind awareness. Because otherwise, all people are doing is seeing their bills and they don't know what to do with them. But if we're constantly connecting with the community as being an available resource, then I think we have a better chance of success. And that includes the community store, where we ensured or tried to ensure, and have continually done that in terms of having energy efficient lighting available. So it's a broader approach around the community, but the community engagement and education is clearly an important part of what we're doing. The community put together a Facebook page on that. We had kids in the green team. Boy, we had a lot of fun in those dinners and being in the community, where everybody, it was the positive side of energy efficiency, whereas on the other side, people were facing big bills. So this was important in building momentum in the community. The first set of measures were, they were very similar to ECAP as it was then, with basic measures. And you can see that, there were savings. It was $15,000 worth of saving to BC Hydro, which is good for the utility. But at the customer end, that saving is about $50 a year. In the scheme of things, when your bill is about $4,000 or $5,000 a year, $50, you can't even see the difference. So that's part of the challenge with prescriptive programs, is the change is not necessarily meaningful for individual residents. That was one of our obvious big aims, is to make that meaningful. So we collected data, building envelope, air leakage issues, space heating systems, and residents' concerns. So those were our three key areas in terms of data collection. The biggest thing we found was temperature controls. Temperature controls in the community were really poor. The photograph on the right-hand side there shows you three controls in a home. And I challenge all of you, particularly those of you who are technically inclined, if you were sitting in that home, what would you do? What's each of those things for? Well, actually, the reality is there's two thermostats there. One controls a wood furnace, the other one controls an electric furnace, and the third one is a dehumidistat. And of course, nobody bothered to tell the residents. I mean, I must admit, when we first got there, we were flummoxed. So essentially, these were on-off switches for residents, and they turn them on when they were cold, and they turn them off when they were warm. So that was a big part of the consumption issue. The baseboard heaters in the middle picture there are the ones that I love to hate. I really don't know why we have them, but you've got to bend down and turn that knob to get to a comfortable temperature. There's no temperature setting in terms of degrees, and typically they tend to be behind furniture and that sort of thing. So you know what? They get left on, and we open our windows, even though they're Energy Star windows, to control temperatures. In Kwadacha, many of the houses have crawl spaces, and in order to stop freezing in the winter, where temperatures get down to -40, baseboard heaters have been installed. The thermostats controlling those baseboard heaters are analog thermostats, and essentially they were set in many houses at around 26 Celsius, so they were probably working in the middle of summer as well. So those were the sort of key elements of what we found was really having a huge impact in the community. But of course, if we needed to go in with our eyes open, our ears open, and work out what the issues were. High air infiltration rates. There's a picture of a door there, the front door. You can see the daylight coming through. A number of broken windows, a number of single pane windows, and really a lot of air infiltration. Insulation levels were a mix, anywhere from R18 to R41, and of course the code for the area requires R52. So they were the three major issues that we found that we thought could have a meaningful impact. So better temperature controls, secondly, reduce air infiltration rates, and thirdly, add insulation. There were a lot of other things, but these were the key things that we felt we had to do. Lighting was an important part, and we made those changes, but it wasn't the big driver of the huge energy costs. So the analysis: eliminate waste. We just talked about that. Behaviors and choices are important for residents. The building envelope, heating controls, and the third thing was really to make sure that the residents had a choice around heating, in terms of making sure that the wood heating equipment was safe and functional. So as part of the project, actually, Kwadacha made the investment of doing a safety audit and replacing a number of the wood stoves and the wood furnaces. Actually, no, wood stoves. We went away from wood furnaces. And so electricity became really, or the hope was and is that electricity becomes a standby fuel. Deep retrofits, I'm not going to go through all of those, but box end joists and everything else that goes with deep retrofits. But air sealing was a really important part. Education. This is a picture of Tracy Charlie, and Tracy has done an amazing job. She's been our eyes and ears in the community, and I don't think we'd have been successful without the efforts of Tracy. Every time there was an issue with the client, she tried to solve it. If she didn't, she always knew we had a resource. Actually, now we have, with the client's permission or the resident's permission, we have access to their My Hydro accounts. So when Tracy has an issue, we can jointly look at the billing and the usage, and we can solve problems at a distance. So, it's building that relationship. But again, I'd like to thank Tracy for the great work that she did in making this a success. So the business case, and Jim, I'm going to have to ask you for some help here.
Whoops.
I'll be back.
Lost the
cursor you want to about?
Yeah, just a second here. We gotta hide this.
Okay.
Not sure why that is doing that. There we go.
Okay, thank you. No problem. So we picked 11 pilot homes. Why 11 pilot homes? We felt that was going to fit in within the budget that was likely to be available. So it's as simple as that. So there was a total of the previous consumption on those 11 pilot homes was just over 400,000 kilowatt hours. You can see our forecast there. We were expecting to reduce from each of those three items that I talked about. So we were able to quantify those, and obviously we stood by them. 137,000 kilowatt hour savings, and we were looking at the new consumption being just under 300,000 kilowatt hours. Total project costs were $267,000. There was some additional funding. I think it was about another $30,000 or $50,000 that Kwadacha contributed towards transportation. Getting to Kwadacha is an expensive business. You have to fly to Prince George and then have a charter flight from Prince George to Kwadacha. So, there was significant additional cost. But for BC Hydro, there was a net benefit to cost ratio of 1.3 on a net present value. Payback on diesel costs of 5.6 years. Given that I think BC Hydro spends about $15 million on diesel a year, you can see these are big numbers for communities. And this is what we achieved, or at least that's the results that we saw a year later. So we were fairly close in terms of what we estimated we would achieve in terms of consumption, maybe a little bit more. And I think we hadn't taken into account, we had not in our modeling taken into account any behavior changes. So I think that's obviously part of the mix, but it was close enough for the community and everybody else to be reasonably satisfied with what we had achieved. Here's the impact of the reductions on each of the households. This is their bills before and after. So there's the average bill of it was $48,000 in all the 11 homes, a drop in $23,000 of what was going to go out of the community. So it's significant, and $2,000 per home. So. And there's a negative number there, and part of the reason there is we had issues with a wood furnace in one of the homes, and so the resident really couldn't use it for periods of time. So that's why there's that for home number 9. There's a negative number, and we had a similar impact in home number 3, where the resident couldn't use the furnace, the wood furnace. So that's telling you the sort of financial impact on a community where, especially when people are earning $540 a month, it's a big number. So ongoing from there, where now Tracy has been collecting data on the houses using an iPad application that we have created with Kwadacha. We're developing purchasing and maintenance specifications for the band for their existing homes. Specifications for new homes, given what we've learned, what we've seen, what should new homes look like, a green energy strategy for the community, and behavioral aspects where we're looking to develop incentives and feedback for residents, and actually move on further with that and develop energy conservation into Kwadacha's housing policy. So that's ongoing work. Last slide, really. Is why was Kwadacha successful? I think community leadership, especially Chief Donnie Van Sommer, I think was an integral part of the success. That was important. We worked together. We all had expertise, and one was not superior to the other. We worked together to make sure we had the same goals, understand community needs. We talked about training and support. All of these things are kind of important, and solid business case. And I think the last one is really important, is that BC Hydro and ANSI accepted a solution that was out of the box. It wasn't the norm. They accepted it, and I think we ought to be thankful that happened. And so that's basically the Kwadacha story so far. It'll continue, and as Dawn had said to me when I first met her, Rafe, energy efficiency is not an event, it's a process. So we're still in the process, and we're trying to get better. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Arif. Great presentation. And maybe we'll just keep that we'll keep that slide up while we're having our discussion here. We're all great reminders. So what I'm going to do, oh, that doesn't work. All these little things that we'll do this instead. Okay, so I can see that there's already some questions here. So why don't we, and if you've got a question, please try, if you can, to type it into the question function here, and we'll do our best to answer it. Either Arif or Dawn can try to answer it. So the first question is, how many houses do you put insulation upgrades in to save BC Hydro $43,000?
All 11 houses had some level of insulation put in. They varied depending on what was there.
Okay, hopefully that helps to answer the question. And second question here is, did BC Hydro contribute anything towards moving to wood heat?
No, that funding for wood heat came primarily from Kwadacha's own resources, and new furnaces were put in. New wood furnaces, were put in by Kwadacha, and BC Hydro did not contribute to that.
Okay, there's a very specific question here. We might need to do a follow-up on this, but someone's wondering about what type of wood burning equipment we install, or the community installed, a manufactured make and model. So,
Leo, I can't remember, sorry, but I can get the information.
Okay, so what I'm going to do here is just, because some people ask more than one question, is make sure that everyone at least gets one question answered, and then we'll go back to any that we didn't address. So there's a question here about the cost of the retrofits. What were the soft costs of your engagement with the community from 2010 to current days, and how was this funded?
The soft cost, so in the larger project, our costs were $25,000 for project management, plus travel costs at cost. And that was funded, that was included in the $276,000, as well as salaries for the energy champion. So there was a lot of soft costs included in the 276,000. The 276,000 wasn't just for infrastructure upgrades; it was all the associated soft costs with the project.
And I believe my recollection is it was primarily BC Hydro with a small amount from Van City and from the Ministry of Energy that would have covered those costs.
Yes, the soft costs, absolutely.
The soft costs, yeah. Okay. What actions did you guys do for air tightness?
Well, there were a lot of obvious things in terms of air tightness, in terms of plumbing penetrations. Windows, some of the windows had to be replaced because the glazing was single glazed or just was not adequate. We replaced doors in many of the houses, and then the largest part, I suspect, I'm trying to remember here, was in the basement or the crawl spaces under the box end joists, and making sure that we didn't get air infiltration from that end. I hope that answers your question, Robert.
Okay, there's a question from Lynn. It says, were tankless water heaters incorporated also?
No, they weren't, Lynn. And the reason for that is we never really saw, we did not see sort of a lot of use of hot water or a lot of untoward use of hot water. And the faucet aerators were installed in the first phase that we did, and so the changing out of hot water tanks was not included. There was another complication in terms of tankless moving away to technology. Is Kwadacha has a very hard, the water is very hard, so water tanks don't last that long, and so we were a little worried about putting more expensive technology in when the community really couldn't get reasonable life out of those particular pieces of equipment.
Question about how the houses were selected from Jillian. were the 11 houses selected for the pilot the worst energy offenders, you said the most leaky, or did you select a sampling of houses to represent the broader community?
This was essentially the houses with the highest consumption. So it was a combination of leakiness and as well as behavior. And essentially, it was looking at the list and saying, okay, these houses, actually the community determined which houses that we were going to work on. So that was essentially the top or the worst consumers.
Okay. Another question here around engagement from Ananthan is, how would you change the engagement process if the community leadership was not as strong in another community? I don't know, Dawn, if you would have any suggestions around this as well. Or Reef, either.
Well, I think the engagement process was actually pretty good. Like just finding someone in the community to be that energy champion, that because Tracy did a lot of her work directly with the reef, so it was kind of outside of chief and council's responsibility, let's say. And the other thing is, like regular community dinners is really where a lot of the community got on board with this. So I don't know, I guess if you don't have those, you find another way.
And I would add to that in terms of Ananthan's question, if there isn't strong leadership, then I think you've just got to do a lot more and make sure that there is a lot more feedback to the community, that the community is aware of the changes or the proposed changes. So it's a little bit more work, really, I think, is how we would want to approach it. Whereas, in Kwadacha's case, we would speak to Don or we'd speak to Donnie and they would say yes or no. But I think if we didn't have that in a community, then I think we would have to be a lot more involved and make sure we're touching base with the community a lot more regularly than we did in Kwadacha.
Okay, another question here from Joan, and I don't know if Dawn or Arif will be able to answer it, but has the project success influenced ANSI's housing funding programs and or policies?
I certainly can't answer that question. Dawn, can you?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that one. I don't know if it has yet. We're trying to work with ANSI. Like, they're very open to discussion on pretty much anything, but there isn't, what we found with this particular project is there really isn't anything where this falls within their current system. We kind of have to make it fit, this program over here or this program over here, and we have a couple of ways to go about doing that. I think with this really, there's an element here that's there's a whole bunch of layers to this. And, if you think back, quality of construction on the homes in the communities where capacity is limited, and you just imagine what that looks like, like construction, like the quality is compromised, attics aren't properly ventilated, they're not properly insulated. There isn't a lot of consideration given to, whether you put a tri-pane window or a single pane window. There were crawl spaces without vapor barrier, like just really basic stuff. There might be an opportunity here, to work with, the feds, be it CMHC or INAC or Health Canada even, and Hydro, to how do we get the biggest bang for our buck and improve the standard, like the construction standard. How do we bring the current housing stock up to, an acceptable standard where, energy efficiency has been considered, and then educating community members on just how to reduce consumption. And yes, we know that your house is really poor quality and it's always cold because there's heat escaping everywhere. But, the answer isn't to open up your oven and turn on all your burners, real basic stuff. So, yeah, I'd love to work closer with INAC and figure out a way to address this on a bigger scale, or just add it to their current housing initiatives.
Okay, another question here. I think we've answered everyone's first question, so we'll go back to some of the second questions people have asked, which is whether BC Hydro has actually seen a reduction in the peak demand in this community in kilowatts, not just the energy usage.
So I haven't seen any specific numbers, but I suspect, Nick, that there was a reduction because we part of the plan was to remove the 11 kilowatt furnaces that had been installed, and they probably caused quite a jerk on the system. And those things are quite well. Anyway, I don't know why we installed them in diesel communities, and I don't think we should. So whereas we ended up with baseboard heaters instead, with zone control, so we should have seen a reduction in peak demand, but I haven't seen any numbers specifically.
I can add a little bit to that, Aris, because we have a system where there are a number of community members that it's just necessary for us to subsidize their hydro, elders, people on income assistance. So we get, with everyone's permission, of course, we actually get a printout of the bills, and then we pick off who's we're going to help out with, and the bills themselves are actually going down. I mean, not necessarily how quickly they're getting paid, but the actual bills are going down. And we've looked very specifically at some of the houses where we've done specific work, like the band, the community's actually put about $150,000 into this. About 100 of that was these wood stoves. So we're specifically looking at those homes. And as far as in terms of kilowatts, I don't look that closely at the bills, but I would guess that hydro is seeing a reduction on a community level.
Another question here from Leo is, whom did you work with at Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada?
So, Leo, I didn't personally work with anybody at Aboriginal Affairs. It was Don and Jim, but I think it was Rick Saveston, right? That was our I subsequently have worked with Rick,
Sure.
But at the time I did not.
Yeah, I guess, Don, you would have had your capital officer, whoever was involved in the application, and then Rick Saveston, who's on the call here as well. Nancy was also involved in helping us at the beginning stages. Is there anybody else?
Not really. No, this just went through it was kind of a one-off through a renovation program, and we dealt with Jan on submissions and getting her all the paperwork in. But other than that, I don't. Obviously Jeff Karcher was involved in the remote community electrification program. But other than that, I don't. If I'm missing anybody, my apologies, but I don't think so. Okay,
there's a question from Jamie here about this project. It says, sees a lot of this includes BC Hydro partnership. Will they engage with a community that generates their own power?
I don't think I'm in a position to answer that, Jamie. Sorry, I wish I had an answer for you.
Yeah, probably we're not the right ones to answer that. I would say, on energy efficiency, it's probably rare, although there may be some other relationship with the First Nations community that would involve this, but I couldn't say. Perhaps that's a follow-up discussion. We could try and connect you with someone at Hydro to talk about that. Another question from Robert is about which action had the best cost-benefit ratio based on the achieved reductions. I don't know if that's possible for you to...
Yeah, I would hazard a guess that it was really the temperature controls, Robert, that had the biggest impact. Analog temperature controls where people really don't know what number the things or how many degrees the things sat at, I think was a big part of the issue in Kwadacha, and from what I've seen in many other communities. There is also an issue which I don't quite have an answer to yet, is when people are used to wood heat that is not as controllable as electric heat or any other form of heat, they're used to higher temperatures in their home. And so we have that little sort of conflict happening about what is a comfortable temperature. But the thermostats, I would say, and temperature controls, in Kwadacha's case, together with behavioral changes, I think probably had the biggest impact in terms of cost benefit.
Okay. Just a simple question here, I guess, is there were 11 homes upgraded, but how many total homes are there in Kwadacha? Do you know, Dawn?
We have probably about 80 homes that we want to carry on with in some form or fashion. Whether we have to do them 12 at a time or however that looks. We've got an answer for the next 20 or so, but that will depend on how successful we are at getting funding.
There you go. We have a question that came in by email, I think, from Leona, which is there any monies to assist with conversion of heating systems? Leona, I'm guessing you're with a First Nation community.
Difficult to answer that in terms of converting. I'm assuming your question is converting from electricity to wood. If it's not, then I don't know. There is the HERO program, which I think has some money, but I'm the home energy. I can't remember what the R stands for. Anyway, there is, I believe, some funding available for conversion, but it depends, Leona, what we're trying to convert from to. In Kwadacha's case, we were converting from electricity to wood, and there was funding. The band basically funded that themselves. That money did not come from BC Hydro.
Okay, well, maybe that's a question we can. She's talking about converting all homes to wood. So perhaps that's a question we can follow up with you on, Leona, in a bit more detail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Find out how Kwadacha was able to do that.
I think the only thing I would say, Leona, it's a question, to my mind, at the end of the day, it's a question about making a business case about these issues. Because if people are saving money or organizations are saving money as a result of conversion, then I think that's a first start, is to show them the dollars in terms of converting from one to the other. So what's the impact? I think that's an important piece.
Okay. So as a follow-up question from Tom Pierre about the soft costs. So he's saying what's remarkable in this project is the long-term nature of the relationship 2010 to 2013 and ongoing. It's a great example that would be great to replicate. How did you get capacity to maintain that relationship for that long? Were each phase funded separately? Was it a multi-year project? How could communities get the same support over several years and ongoing? I can say for certain that it was not multi-year funding. Yeah. That's one thing that's quite true.
I don't know. I'll ask Don maybe, and you can jump in too. But I think from our perspective, as Jim says, it wasn't a multi-year funding, and it still isn't multi-year funding. We're going year from year, and in some cases, the band would say, we're confident of getting funding. Can you continue with this work? And we would get paid for it. In other instances, there was no funding, but we thought we would get funding the following year. So we, sort of pushed the boat out and continued to work. So it was really the strong relationship. I'd like to think, Don, I hope you can confirm that.
No, I was going to add that as well. Like just the whole, there were so many layers to this that just to keep it all moving, it really. It was the Reef and his crew. It was, Kwadacha leadership. It was Tracy. It was Robin at Hydro. It really was. It would be really nice to have a program where you could just say, here it is. But I think, we kind of have an idea on how to do it on a go forward basis. But really, we learned a lot along the way.
Yeah. So I think our goal, we kept our eye on the longer term goal, and we saw funding as an opportunity or a constraint, and didn't really say, well, the year is ending, so everything stops. We kind of knew we had to deal with the reality of funding, but we knew our relationship was strong, and then we were able to help each other move forward. So it was really having that core principle between us to move forward. That was important, and then we would find the funding. I don't know. We've been lucky so far. Hopefully, we can continue to do so. But it was really just out on a wing and a prayer at times, to be honest.
A specific question about the wood furnaces. Were they a combination of electric forced air furnaces? So a combination of wood and electric. Question from Lynn.
Yes, they were. They were. It was interesting that the CMHC built houses all had wood furnaces with a combined electric and a forced air system. So that was true in the CMHC funded houses. The non-CMHC funded houses just had a regular wood stove. I don't know what the historical quirk with that was, but that was the case, Lynn.
And Dawn, when the stoves were replaced, have you moved away from the furnaces, or were those?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. The 100,000 we spent was all wood stoves.
Okay.
And it was like, I don't know, maybe 20 installed systems.
Okay. Lots of questions here, so I appreciate everyone's sticking with us here. And next one is from Christopher. His question is, how can more of these whole building retrofit projects be supported as opposed to one-off retrofits addressing water heaters, furnaces, or envelopes only?
Yeah, I mean, Christopher, I'm with you, but I think it's just a question of talking about this project and other projects that we're involved in, and other projects that other people are involved in. And I think we've just got to keep talking about it, keep making the financial case. I think the financial case is critical. Without that, nobody's going to listen to anybody. So I think we're just continually on this cycle of trying to convince utilities and governments that this is a better way and a more cost-effective way to move, certainly in First Nations housing. But utilities and governments have their own issues. They can't just change this overnight. There are a number of constraints that they're working with. But hopefully, over a period of time, we can arrive at a place, because we really have an issue in terms of the dollars that go out of the community on energy. So we have to solve this problem. It is a real problem for British Columbia, and I suspect for the rest of Canada too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the really nice things we've been able to do is we've been able to measure the improvement and kind of segregate the efficiency upgrades from other upgrades, because, of course, depending on what funding agency you're dealing with, you have to be able to do that. So that's something that's come out of this that's gotten easier over the years.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions. We have one question here, which is, were there any issues related to the use of green wood in the community and problems with creosote in the catalytic stoves?
Yes, there was a little bit, Robert. There was a little bit of problem with that, but I think again it was really useful to have Tracy there to be able to provide education around that. But yes, it was an issue, not a major issue, but certainly an issue.
Okay. Another question from Leona around the wood stove conversion is, would BC Hydro, ANSI, and CMHC be open to cost sharing in the conversion from gas to wood? Or I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, what the conversion is, but basically converting to wood in homes. And I'm not sure any of us probably have the answer to that question, but perhaps, again, Leona, perhaps we can follow up and see what we can do to get a better answer to that question to you.
So far, they weren't. So that was something that the band did on their own.
Okay. So you had some other funding to deal with that outside of your ANSI funding.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've covered all the questions here. Oh, we got one more here. It says, with the heat conversions, did you also purchase and install water softeners in the homes?
No, that has not been done, but I'm convinced that there's a business case for that. And Don, you might have a comment to that.
Yeah, the reason that wasn't done is the community is currently undergoing quite an extensive water system upgrade, so that's all part of that project.
Okay, so you're hoping to deal with that at the community level, to have softer water in people's.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay, well, I had a great discussion here, and appreciate all the questions. I think at this point we'll close things off, and thank both of our speakers, both Don Bursey and Arif Abraham, for their great presentations, and thanks to everyone for your involvement engaging in this webinar. Lots of good discussion. In spite of the technology here, it's possible to do. So a few people have asked whether the presentation will be available after, and yes, it will be available on our website in the near future, both the PDFs of the PowerPoints as well as a recording of the webinar. So I think a lot of ways that's really some crucial information that was shared during the discussion. If you have any questions or follow-up, feel free to contact myself. Got my contact information there, Jim Vanderwall, or my colleague Elena Chia. We're always interested in hearing from people and communities who are working on issues, and do what we can to help you find resources or find answers to your questions around energy efficiency and improving the state of housing. So thanks again to everyone, and stay tuned. We'll certainly have some more of these in the fall on different topics and different communities' experiences. Well, thanks everyone.